Welcome back, guys, to another edition of the MMA Pick'ems podcast. I am your host, Ray, and today I'll be breaking down UFC Fight Night, Barboza versus Chikadze. And this is looking like a pretty solid card, a bit of a Frankenstein card with all the fights that have fallen off and the fights that have been rebooked, plus fighters coming in short notice, and matchups just being made left and right here on this card. But still, a pretty solid card all around. I mean, the main event, Barboza-Chikadze, a very exciting matchup. Good to see the division moving along again, and we're wrapping up tough also, so we have a few of those fights on this card. And, Kevin Lee's on the card, super underrated, underappreciated fighter in my opinion. He was originally scheduled to fight Sean Brady, but, D-Rod stepping in, making this a pretty intriguing fight nonetheless. And Mahmoud Muradov, another exciting prospect, is on the card. Speaking of exciting prospects, we got Wellington Turman. No, I'm just playing. We also have Mana Martinez, should be an exciting fight. Pat Sabatini, Jamal Emmers, another good fight. So looking like a pretty fun card on paper. Not that that's really an indicator of how the card's going to go, because last week the card was supposed to be kind of bad on paper, but it ended up being a pretty good card. I mean, I think we started off the night with 4 or 5 finishes. There were some pretty boring decisions on there, but by and large, I felt the card was still pretty good. So with that, I guess we'll segue into doing the recap of the previous event here. So I was able to come off the card with a 1.46 unit profit. Overall, it was a pretty light card. There were a couple fights that I am kind of kicking myself for not putting a little action on. That I felt I had a pretty good read on, right? One of them being the Pichel-Hubbard fight. So I remember saying that I did favor Pichel to win the fight. I thought that he was just a well-rounded enough fighter to really win it wherever the fight went. The only thing really putting me off was the fact that, he was getting a little older and he is coming off of a somewhat long layoff. And the fact that he was a slight favorite kind of put me off of it a little bit, but the read was pretty bang on. And with how well Pichel looked in there, he definitely, I'd say, outperformed his price tag. And I do have to say, just for future reference, that I feel the cardio of Hubbard is definitely overrated. I mean, he has shown to be able to survive against some grapplers in Madsen and Roshkopf, but, these guys don't exactly have the best cardio. And so he's kind of overperformed a bit against guys with kind of shitty cardio, because even in his fight against Dakota Bush, who was coming in short notice, it looked like Hubbard was slowing down. And in his fight against Pichel, it definitely looked like Hubbard was kind of slowing down as well. So going forward, I feel we could definitely fade Hubbard against fighters with, decent or good cardio, or at least cardio that could kind of match his. But yeah, just going back to that fight, in hindsight, obviously, a little upset I didn't pull the trigger on Pichel, but, there were just so many variables regarding Pichel. But, this next fight, I felt like I had a pretty good read on that. I ended up not pulling the trigger, and this is one I actually am kind of kicking myself over, and that's the Bahamondes Roosevelt Roberts fight. So, I straight up picked Bahamondes to win, and I felt like he should have been the slight favorite, and the fact that he was like the slight underdog should have warranted at least like half a unit or, a 1 unit shot on him. But, I guess at the time I was just a little concerned about the wrestling of Roberts, even though I felt that Roberts was not really a great wrestler. And Bahamondes still being somewhat unproven, I guess, kept me off of it. But, that's definitely a spot I probably should have put in a little sprinkle on. Obviously, hindsight is 2020. And, I probably should have just taken that prop money I put on shitty fighters like Knight and Sherman and Pilardi and just put it on Bahamondes there. Anyways, it's a good learning moment, but I guess with that, we'll move on and go over the bets that I did place. So I guess while we're on the topic of some of those shitty prop bets, let's start with William Knight. So this one, not as terrible as some of the other ones. So I had him winning in round 2 and round 3. So obviously he gets the knockout in round 1. But yeah, that wasn't even a fight I thought would go that way. So, I thought that Knight would go to the wrestling, the grappling a little bit more. I thought that maybe Charant would have a slight advantage on the feet, but the way he just walked into those counters, I guess Knight was comfortable enough on the feet to not want to have to wrestle with him. But, had he done that, I felt he could have just really worn Charant out and gotten maybe like a stoppage in round 2 or round 3. Obviously, that didn't happen, but, only ended up losing about like half a unit or so on those plays. And moving along, I did put a quarter of a unit on Pilardi to win by decision, which terrible, terrible bet. I just felt that pre-fight, maybe Pilarte would be able to keep the fight standing, keep it at distance, get a few strikes in, possibly get some of his grappling going and make it a competitive fight, in which case the plus 400 price tag would be, I'd say, kind of value, but didn't expect Kelleher to just dominate him in the wrestling, just stay on top of him for pretty much all 3 rounds and win a pretty decisive, dominant decision. Pilarte just had no urgency to get up whatsoever. And, I did say the guy was a bum in my breakdown, but, I ended up giving him a little more credit than I should have. I should have just avoided this fight, honestly. The guy's terrible. I think he's going to get cut. But moving along, I had Sherman to win by KO TKO. At plus 160, I felt there was a little value there. I thought that Sherman would have a much more or a much bigger athletic advantage. I thought he'd be the bigger, more powerful guy in there, and just felt that he'd be able to get Sherman out of there, or Porter out of there, because I thought that at the time Sherman is the type of fighter to usually win pretty spectacularly against these lower level heavyweights, but obviously didn't perform to my expectation there. Straight up, he looked pretty bad. I'd say he had one decent round in him and slowed down pretty significantly. His cardio looked pretty atrocious in there. Not much more to say here. I think I overrated Sherman going into that fight and kind of underrated Porter. So yeah, that's that for that fight. But moving along into the main card, I did redeem myself a little bit here. Took Alexandre Pantoja over Brandon Royval. Had a 2.5 unit shot on him. Also took Pantoja to win by submission, a quarter of a unit. So while I did pick Pantoja to win by submission, it didn't exactly play out the way I had expected it to. In fact, I was kind of shitting myself early in that fight because Pantoja went to that grappling early and aggressively. And, I did say that I did have concerns about the cardio of Pantoja in this fight. And he was kind of playing right into the style of Royval, right? Because Royval thrives in these scrambly, grapply sort of situations where eventually he'll just outlast you, and he'll be the one who's going to be turning it on later in the fight. I had hoped that Pantoja would keep the fight standing because I felt he had the advantage on the feet, and it did look like he did, right? Because anytime the fight was on the feet, he was landing, I think, the much harder shots on Royval, but he was really aggressive with the takedowns and the grappling, and that did make me sweat a bit because by the end of the first round, the guy definitely looked way slower in there. But ultimately, the reason I did take Pantoja to win straight up and also by submission as well was, for one, the submission prop I think was much better than the knockout prop. And just overall, I felt that Pantoja was the better fighter. The only thing that Royval had over him was the cardio. And so even if Pantoja wasn't able to get the submission, I'd feel he'd do good enough to at least bank 2 rounds to win on the scorecards. But I did end up putting a little bit on the submission prop as well, because I felt that if the fight were to get to the ground, I actually do favor Pantoja there a bit more. I feel like the guy is got much better jiu-jitsu than Royval, and I feel he's the stronger guy as well. So, being more technical, being a bit stronger, he could definitely outmuscle Royval there. And even though I didn't expect Pantoja to be the one initiating these grappling exchanges, I felt that if Royval were to shoot a takedown or something, or if Royval started grappling, that Pantoja would kind of flip the script on him. But obviously Pantoja, being as aggressive as he did, must have seen some holes in Royval's game that he felt he could take advantage of. And, both times we saw, or in both rounds, we saw Pantoja just rip Royval to the ground and immediately look for the back. And so I guess Pantoja probably did feel like he had a pretty significant advantage there and really looked to exploit it. And he definitely showed being, the stronger fighter, the more kind of, I guess, practiced Brazilian jiu-jitsu guy in there, and was able to eventually find the neck of Royval and submit him. But yeah, that was a great fight, and definitely lived up to the hype. And now we potentially get to see Pantoja go up against Moreno for the 3rd time, even though Pantoja's are already beaten him twice. So that's going to be a very, very interesting matchup. And the fact that it's going to be a 5-rounder and a title fight is going to be even more interesting. So I'm really looking forward to that. But, going back to this card, we got to keep moving on here. Marco Madsen, Clay Guida. So I did have a 2-unit shot on Madsen, and I really lucked out this fight, honestly. I had expected Madsen to go to the wrestling a little bit more, but, the guy did not shoot a single takedown, kept it standing, and was still able to somehow win on the feet. That was, an extremely dicey fight in my opinion. It was a fight that, quite frankly, could have gone either way, but it would appear that Madsen was landing some of the heavier shots, and I guess the judges scored that in favor of him, whereas Guido was just moving around a lot more, throwing out a lot more, but definitely not landing as hard and as clean of the strikes as some of Madsen's were. So yeah, that happened, and then, at least the judging was somewhat consistent in that sense, because I did bet Gastelum over Cannonier. Cannonier obviously ended up getting the decision, but it looked like the judges were scoring the heavier shots of Cannonier over, I guess, the volume of Gastelum, if you want to even call it that. It definitely looked like Gastelum was, being the one, pushing forward, being the aggressor, but it seemed like Cannonier was landing the heavier shots. And, not too upset about this bet here. Gastelum being a plus 180 dog, I think was just a little ridiculous. And, had he put it on a little harder on just one of the rounds, one of the swing rounds, he could very easily have won a pretty close decision here, in which case I think the plus 180 definitely kind of pays it off. But outside of that, not too much more to say there. KG with a crazy chin as always, was eating some absolute bombs from Cannonier and just kept fighting through them. And lastly, I do have to give some props to the judging last night. At least it was consistent. And I guess sometimes when they do a good job, you do have to commend them a little bit. But that'll do it for this recap. Went a little longer than I expected, considering we didn't have that much action on this card. But anyways, let's dive right into the breakdown for this full card. All right, so in this fight, we have Mana Martinez versus Guido Canetti. And this fight got announced pretty recently. No line for this, so again, I'll line this one a little later after I do the breakdown. And correct me if I'm wrong here, guys, but it would appear that Mana Martinez straight up ducked Trevin Jones and was able to get matched up here with Guido Canetti, because Martinez was initially matched up with Strader. Strader pulled out, and then Trevin Jones steps in. Martinez withdraws for no apparent reason, and now he gets to fight Guido Canetti. And he needs to give his agent a raise, or at least half his performance of the night bonus when he starts as Canetti. Now Jones has to end up fighting a killer in the Said Yokup guy, while Martinez gets another softball matchup. Now that I'm thinking about it, I think that Jones should definitely fire his manager or his agent, because the guy's been facing nothing but killers. I mean, Timur Valiev as his debut, Mario Batista, who was a massive favorite against him, and now he draws Said Yokup, who appears to be a killer. Anyways, back to this matchup, Mana Martinez. So the guy is primarily a striker. He moves well on his feet. He's got pretty quick hands, pretty quick timing. Not too much more to say here, man. I already broke down, already did a breakdown for him last week. The guy's, I think, very dangerous on the feet, does have a lot of finishing upside. Volume does tend to be a little low, but, I don't think it's going to matter too much in this matchup. He's going up against Guido Canetti, who, in my opinion, is definitely not UFC caliber at this point. I don't actually even know what he's really good at. Canetti does appear to primarily be a grappler, but I have heard the commentary crew refer to him as a striker, so I'm not really sure what he really excels in. But, on the feet, he does seem a little wild, a bit aggressive. And, I've seen him look to clinch up with opponents, look to get the fight to the ground. Just overall, though, he hasn't really looked that great in the UFC. And, none of his performances really stood out to me. And at 41, I don't think the guy is getting better at all. And he's coming off of now what's going to be like a 1.5 layoff. So, man, I don't think the odds are in his favor whatsoever. I mean, just being 41 at bantamweight is a bit of a death sentence, honestly. The guy's going to be at a pretty significant speed and athletic disadvantage. And, coming off a 1.5 layoff, he's probably going to be a bit rusty. And I don't think was ever really that good of a fighter to begin with. So the decline, on top of the fact that there wasn't much to decline from, the guy's probably going to be in a really tough spot this fight. But taking a look at this matchup, I just think that Martinez is just going to be a little too quick for him. The movement, the feints, the power is probably going to be a little too much for Canetti. Kennedy might have one good round in him, probably even less. I was being a little generous there. He might honestly have like 3 or 4 minutes of cardio before he starts to slow down. And by then, I think Martinez is just going to be able to get his timing down and probably just knock him out. Kennedy, not exactly the most durable guy in there. He did get finished by Marlon Vera, which, not a terrible loss, but, did get knocked out by Becquerel. And, the guy just did not look good in either of those fights. And something that I kind of wanted to add on in addition to, the durability concerns is the fact that I just don't think he's going to take the damage very well at all, because I think in both of those fights, or at least in the Vera fight, Vera started landing some pretty vicious knees on him, and I just don't think Kennedy really wanted to be in there. I think he just shelled up after that. And at 41, I just don't think the guy's really going to want to go to war. Once he starts feeling the power, once he starts getting damaged up a little bit, I don't think he's going to want to continue to keep fighting. I think it's just going to take a few good shots for Martinez to put Kennedy out, honestly. As far as how I'd line the fight, I think that Martinez is probably going to be at least like minus 300, minus 350, similar to where Batista was lined before. And I definitely feel that Batista's probably the more deserving minus 400 favorite, but Martinez, I do think, has what it takes to put Kennedy out. I really have a hard time seeing Kennedy win this fight. He might have a little bit of grappling success early, but again, I just don't think he's got the cardio to sustain that for more than maybe 3 or 4 minutes. So, if he does go attack the grappling, that'll really only tire him out faster, and that'll just lead to a quicker finish. So I see Martinez likely getting the finish in the first round or sometime in the second round here. So the pick here for me is going to be Martinez, and I got him winning by knockout in the first round. And moving along, we have Jamall Emmers versus Pat Sabatini, and this is close to a pick'em right now. Sabatini's minus 115, Emmers is minus 105, and I guess we'll start with Emmers here first. And I think this is something I may have said before in a previous breakdown for Emmers, but I just feel it's really unfortunate that he lost via head kick, against Erosa, because I feel that had he have won that fight, he would have had a pretty solid UFC career. The guy's very well-rounded. He's got really good boxing. He moves well on the feet, really good head movement. And, he is someone who is going to mix in the wrestling as well. The guy, I feel, is definitely UFC caliber. It's just kind of unfortunate how things played out. So, yeah, he's got that head kick loss against Erosa on, the Contender Series. Ends up having to go back to the regional scene where he gets basically, I think, 4 finishes. Comes back to the UFC, gets matched up against Giga Chikadze, and loses to him in a very close fight, right? It was a split decision, and it's against Chikadze, who's actually headlining this card. And, that was just a very winnable fight for him. That's a fight where, had he have gone to the wrestling a little bit more, he definitely could have won that. But, it is what it is. People are probably going to hate on him a bit for not having the fight IQ to do that. But it was a pretty close fight. And, maybe he thought he had it in the bag or something. But, I'm not gonna hate on him too much for not being a little more aggressive with the takedowns, because I don't think he was, getting destroyed on the feet or anything. But yeah, it was a close fight against a really solid fighter in Chikadze. So, I'm not gonna hate on him too much for that. And then in his most recent fight, he gets matched up with Vince Cachero, who was coming in short notice, up a weight class, pretty much dominates him like he should. So now he draws Pat Sabatini, who is I guess another pretty tough prospect who's got a very good skill set. So, not a lot of easy matchups for Emmers, in my opinion. But, taking a look at Sabatini, the guy is primarily a grappler. He does move well on the feet. He's got lots of movement, and will look to throw spinning attacks as well. But generally, he'll look to take the fight to the fence, look to clinch up, look for some knees or some trips along there. And once he's on top, he will look for submissions and, occasionally throw some ground and pound to stay busy and, potentially create openings on the ground. Overall, I'd say he's a pretty solid grappler. His wrestling is decent, but, just seems like he's not that good at getting takedowns out in the open. He's really reliant on getting those takedowns up along the fence. So I'd say this is kind of a striker versus grappler matchup, although, I'd say both guys are pretty decently well-rounded. Obviously, I do give the advantage to Emmers on the feet, and while Emmers does look to hit takedowns occasionally, I don't think he's as high of a level grappler as Sabatini. So yeah, on the feet though, I do give a pretty significant advantage to Emmers. I just think he's just much more fluid there. I think he's got much better hands on the feet, and I think he's just a much more comfortable striker. Whereas with Sabatini, he will throw some spinning attacks on the feet, but generally he'll look to close the distance and get the fight to the ground. And on the ground, I definitely do favor the grappling of Sabatini a bit more. Although, we haven't really seen Emmers off his back. We haven't really seen him, go up against a high-level wrestler or anything. So I haven't really seen Emmers' takedown defense or defensive grappling really tested. And for Sabatini, you'd have to go all the way back to his fight against Damon Blackshear to really see how he matches up against another black fighter. No, I'm just kidding. That's, I think, the most recent fight where he went to a decision that he didn't completely dominate in the grappling in. I know he went to decision against Tristan Connolly, but, that was against a Tristan Connolly who's 35, coming off of a 1.5 year long layoff. And then all of the fights before that, he's basically getting pretty early finishes, and he's just dominating guys on the ground, right? So I had to go all the way back to the Blackshear fight where, it wasn't just an utter domination, although he did have a good amount of success with the grappling. But, we kind of saw what happens when he isn't able to get the fight to the ground. The guy's just pretty low volume on the feet, honestly. And, I don't think Blackshear's really that good. I think, if Emmers is having that much time on the feet against Sabatini, he'll have a lot of success. I think he'll be able to touch Sabatini up if he gets that much time to strike with him. So for that reason, I am going to side with Emmers here. I do think that there is a clear path to victory with the grappling for Sabatini, but I'm going to go out on a bit of a limb here and just kind of make the assumption that Emmers isn't going to be a complete, scrub off his back, and that he will have good enough takedown defense to stuff a few takedowns and keep the fight standing long enough to win on the scorecards. So yeah, the pick here is Emmers, and at -105, I did put like a unit down on him already. I do think that he should be able to keep the fight standing long enough to bank 2 rounds at least. I wouldn't be completely surprised if Sabatini just kind of just rips him to the ground and is able to control him there or even submit him, but I think there's a higher likelihood that we see Emmers keep this fight standing long enough. So the pick here is Emmers, and I have him winning by decision. So in what I believe is the first fight of the night, at least according to Tapology here, we have Abdulrazak Alhassan versus Antonio Braga Neto, and Alhassan's going to be the -131 favorite. Comeback on Braga Neto is +111. And, we're getting the return of Abdulrazak Alhassan here against Braga Neto, who's, coming off of like a 3-4 year layoff. The guy is extremely inactive. The last fight for Braga Neto was last UFC fight was back in 2017, late 2017 against Trevin Giles. And then before that, the guy, fought Clint Hester back in 2014. So the guy has got like 2 fights in the last 7 years. I don't know what the deal is with this guy, but he's got just massive gaps in his MMA career. He is a submission specialist, and, he has competed in jiu-jitsu events. But, as far as MMA goes, he's only got 12 fights and only 3 UFC fights so far, 2-1 in the UFC. Does have a knee bar win over Anthony Smith way back in the day, but since then has yet to win an MMA fight. But yeah, not too much else to say about this guy. The guy, his striking isn't that great. Again, he is primarily a grappler. He is very aggressive with the submission attempts, and, he will look to get this fight to the ground as soon as possible. And with how long of a layoff he's taken, we just don't really know how he's going to look. I assume he's probably going to be in pretty decent shape. He was scheduled to fight Deron Winn back in late 2020. That fight fell through, but he is still participating in jiu-jitsu tournaments and stuff. So I assume he's probably going to be in decent shape. And if he's still training his MMA, you'd have to assume that during the 4 years off, he's probably improved his striking a little bit. And I definitely hope that it is something he's worked on, because he's going to be going up against Abdulrazak Alhassan, who once upon a time this guy was a knockout artist, but ever since he's returned, he's just not been the same fighter. I think it's a mix of just the long layoff, obviously all the personal stuff that's happened to him, very unfortunate, but it's a mix of that, and then the fact that I think a lot of opponents have kind of figured out his game. They're not playing into that, just brawl with him in that first round, because if you're not doing that, if you're staying safe, he'll punch himself out, and then it's pretty much just, you could coast the rest of the fight, because the guy's really only got 1 round of cardio in him, and he's not very good at pacing himself either. So yeah, I mean, he's got 1 round of cardio, and he's going all out in that 1 round. And in his return fight against Lazzez, we kind of saw what happens when you don't engage with him in the brawl. Lazzez was able to pretty much just shell up in that first round, and kind of just roll with the punches a bit, stay safe, and weather the early storm of Alhassan. And after about like the 3-minute mark, Alhassan pretty much gassed himself out. Lazzez was able to start getting off on some of his strikes, was even able to work some of the grappling late in that first round. And, from there, the tides just completely shifted. And from that performance, Alhassan has looked just worse and worse, in each consecutive fight. Because at least in that fight, he had, 2-3 minutes in there where he actually looked decent. But, against Williams, the guy pretty much gets starched in the first, 30 seconds. That was a flash knockout, and, that stuff happens. But somehow he looks even worse against Jacob Malkoun, who was essentially just being fed to him, right? The guy was 4-1 going into that fight. Very limited MMA experience. Was coming off of a knockout loss, too, against Phil Hawes. This was supposed to be an absolute layup for Alhassan, but, he drops the ball there. Malkoun is able to get to his grappling early and pretty much just dominate Alhassan for 3 rounds. And, that is just not a good look whatsoever, because prior to that fight, the thing with Alhassan was he does have a lot of power. He is very explosive. And, especially in that 3rd round, he's going to be extremely dangerous. But, that fight showed that even in the first round, the guy can be neutralized. And, against someone like Braga Neto, who does have that grappling base, you do have to expect him to really attack that grappling early, right? So I think this fight is, going to be pretty straightforward to break down. Alhassan, he's going to have a very small window early in the fight to knock Braga Neto out. But, if he isn't able to get it, if Braga Neto is able to get his hands on him, drag him to the ground, I think the fight's pretty much going to be over. I think Alhassan's just going to be way too tired after the first grappling exchange to really do any significant damage. And, Braga Neto is a very high-level jiu-jitsu artist, so if it gets to the ground, I do see a potential submission there. So the pick here for me is going to be Braga Neto. I just cannot pick Alhassan after those past 3 performances. That said, I wouldn't be completely surprised if Alhassan just starches Braga Neto early. But, I am going to lean towards the Braga Neto side. I think that it's kind of unlikely at this point in his career for Alhassan to, just make a resurgence or anything. So the pick here is Braga Neto. There is obviously some concerns with the long layoff and everything. It's definitely something to keep in mind there. And, it'll be good to see how he looks at the weigh-ins as well. I don't think the guy's going to be out of shape, but, if he is, definitely don't pick him. But the pick right now for me is going to be Braga Neto, and I think he gets it done by round 2 submission. Moving on to the next fight, we have Darren Stewart versus Dustin Jacoby, and Jacoby's the -190 favorite. Come back on. Stewart is +165, and this is a pretty interesting matchup. Stewart's going to be moving up to light heavyweight for this fight, and I'm not quite sure why he's doing that, because even at 185, the guy, while he is big there, he's not like massively oversized, and at light heavyweight, I feel like he's actually a bit undersized. But, taking a look at Stewart, I feel he hasn't really lived up to his potential. The guy definitely has a bit of pop in his punches. He's got some power. He's got some pretty explosive striking. But, outside of that, I don't think he really brings too much to the table. He's generally pretty low volume and really just throws a lot of singular strikes. He will occasionally look to wrestle and, wall install a little bit, like his last fight against Anders, where, he definitely looked like he might have respected the power of Anders a bit going into that rematch. And so he just decided to grapple with Anders that fight. But, someone who doesn't really have his base there, or someone that doesn't really generally fight there, he kind of tired himself out and kind of dropped the, latter half of the fight. He calls himself the dentist, but he's only got 2 knockouts in the UFC out of I think 8 or 9 fights. And one of them is from an elbow. So, it's not like the guy's, finishing guys here left and right. But taking a look at his opponent, Dustin Jacoby, so the guy is primarily a striker as well, more of a kickboxer. The guy moves well on the feet. He will generally throw volume. He's got a pretty solid kicking game. He's good at managing distance and, just has generally good takedown defense, although Cutelaba was able to take him down multiple times. That said, though, Jacoby was able to get up on multiple occasions. It was pretty hard to hold him down. And for this matchup, I just don't see Darren Stewart having a lot of success with the wrestling. If he decides to go there, he's going to be fighting a much bigger guy in Jacoby for this fight. But taking a look at this matchup, I think this one's going to be a pretty rough fight for Darren Stewart here. I think that Darren Stewart, he might be a little bit quicker, might have a little bit more power, but I'm not even sure about that. Jacoby's a pretty big guy and does seem to pack a bit of a punch as well. And Stewart definitely is going to be giving up a bit of size here, and with the way they fight, I think that definitely is going to play a factor. I see Jacoby just getting off on the kicks pretty well, and honestly just staying on the outside and just outworking Stewart. For Stewart to have any success, he'll probably have to crash the distance, make it a really dirty fight. But, I just don't know if he's going to have too much success doing that. I think that Jacoby's probably the more technical striker in there. So, yeah, not too much to say about this fight. I just think that Jacoby's the better striker here. And, being the taller, longer, bigger guy, more technical, it's going to be a really tough matchup for Stewart. I'd say outside of Stewart catching Jacoby, I just don't see him having a real good time this fight. I see Jacoby winning a pretty dominant decision. I think he's probably going to be able to touch up Stewart pretty badly here. So, yeah, the pick here for me is going to be Jacoby. I'm not sure if I'll bet it, though. At minus 190, I do feel the line is about right on Jacoby. Maybe you could say there is a little bit more value, but, I'm actually kind of interested to see how Stewart's going to do at light heavyweight. Maybe he'll have a pretty significant speed advantage, but, I'm not too sure about that. So that is something I'd like to see play out first before I completely fade Stewart, because, this is a fight where I do think that Stewart's got his back against the fence here. I mean, the guy is 0-2-1 in his last 3 and arguably should have lost to Anders in that first matchup. So arguably should have just been 0-2. But, in any case, I don't know how long of a leash he has. This might be a fight where if he loses, he might get cut. So who knows? He might be a little more motivated for this fight. But on paper, and from what I've seen, I do think that Jacoby should take this. So I have Jacoby winning this, and I have him winning a pretty dominant decision. And in the next fight, we have Sam Alvey versus Wellington Turman. And Turman's going to be the minus 145 favorite. Come back on Alvey is plus 125. And I'd have to admit, I am a little surprised that Sam Alvey is still with the promotion. I mean, they must literally be paying him peanuts, because outside of that, I just don't know why they keep bringing him back. He's on a very clear decline, and his fights aren't exactly the most exciting. I mean, we kind of know the deal with Alvey already. The guy is generally pretty low volume. He gets backed up quite a bit, and a lot of the times he's just looking to land that power shot, to land that hook on his opponents. But, if he doesn't do that, then, a lot of the times he's just spent backing up and, just not really doing anything. And his record kind of speaks to it. He's 0-5-1 in his last 6, so he hasn't had a win in 6 fights. And quite frankly, he hasn't looked good in any of those fights, outside of maybe that Dawoon Jung fight, which, I'll be honest, I kind of overrated him coming out of that fight. But, outside of that, he hasn't really looked good whatsoever. Fortunately for him, his opponent, Wellington Turman, isn't that great either, and quite frankly, I don't have much to say about him aside from the fact that I think the guy is a choker, and, I'm probably definitely misusing that term a bit, but just don't really know how else to really describe this guy, right? Because, he's 1-3 in the UFC, but he just finds a way to lose. I mean, his first fight in the UFC, Carl Roberson, The guy is a kickboxer, and Wellington, he's got the grappling base, and he was having a bit of success with the grappling, but Roberson was able to reverse him, was able to get a bit of control time on him. So not a really good look. Especially since Roberson is a kickboxer, doesn't really have much grappling to speak of, and even Roberson was having some success against Turman, and he goes on to get a win against Marcus Perez, who in hindsight doesn't really appear to be UFC caliber. So I don't really see that as being a real quality win, and that was a really sloppy fight too. So it's not like he really dominated Perez either. So that's not a performance or win that I rate really highly. Then he gets matched up with Andrew Sanchez, who is primarily a wrestler, and he gets starched by Andrew Sanchez, which, again, not a really good look. So, so far the guy's kind of getting out grappled a bit by a kickboxer, and then he gets knocked out by a wrestler. Then in his most recent fight against Bruno Silva. And this was a fight where I believe a lot of people were on Turman. I think the guy was like the dog of the week for this fight, where it seemed like it was a somewhat favorable matchup for him, Wellington being a grappler and all, Bruno Silva not having great defensive grappling, has a tendency to slow down. But he kind of drops the ball here where, he was having a bit of success with the grappling, but I believe sometime late in the round, Silva is able to, I think, either take him down or reverse him and basically just smash him with some really nasty ground and pound. So, yeah, while I feel the guy does have a decent skill set, he just finds a way to lose. Kind of got that Maki Pitolo syndrome. And I think the fact that he's only a minus 145 favorite here really says it all, right? Because going up against Sam Alvey, you should be a much bigger favorite. But the fact that Turman routinely drops the ball is the reason why he's not an even bigger favorite. Theoretically, he should be able to get the fight to the ground and, maybe just dominate Alvey there. Maybe look to control him, possibly get the submission. But, with how Turman's fought, I wouldn't be surprised if he just walked right into one of Alvey's hooks and gets put out. But look, I've already learned my lesson here with Sam Alvey. There's no way I'm taking him at this point in his career. But at the same time, do I really want to take a guy named after an English steak dish? I might have to, but in all seriousness, I do think that Turman takes this. I think there's a path to victory here with the grappling, but something you do want to have to keep in mind here for this matchup is Turman has been knocked out in both of his most recent fights, and it was only about 3 months ago this guy's head was getting dribbled off the canvas by Bruno Silva here, and so while Turman is still pretty young, I don't think that 3.5 months is really enough time to fully recover from the effects of that, nasty ground and pound. And if Turman isn't careful in this fight, if he's getting sloppy with his entries and, it's getting a little too telegraphed and Alvey is able to time him with one of his hooks, then I could definitely see Alvey putting him out. But at the end of the day, I do think that Turman wins this. I'm going to pick him to win. I think he gets it done by decision here. I don't think that he's going to be able to sub Alvey. I think he'll just win a kind of a grindy sort of decision here, but I would not be surprised whatsoever if he gets caught by Alvey and gets put out. And so while the pick here is Turman, I definitely don't think I'll be betting him. If anything, I might be looking at the Alvey knockout prop, but outside of that, I don't think I'll be really touching this fight. And moving right along, we have Gerald Meerschaert versus Mahmoud Muradov, and Muradov is the minus 450 favorite. Come back on Meerschaert is plus 360. And Muradov, so he's primarily a striker. The guy's got good boxing. He's got great timing. Will mix in the kicks as well, and does seem to have some pretty good power. And his takedown defense has looked good so far against opponents who do look to wrestle and grapple. So taking a look at his opponents real quick, Sanchez, obviously a wrestler. Who's the other guy? Trevor Smith, also another wrestler, but someone who is a bit past his prime, so not one that you could take too much from. And then DeChirico, who is a well-rounded fighter who will mix in the wrestling, but the guy's been able to stuff all of those takedowns. The guy's got a perfect takedown defense rating, has been able to keep all of these fights standing, and eventually able to find the finish on some of these fights and win pretty dominant decision against DeChirico. So yeah, I feel there's a lot to like about Muradov, and he might be a little hyped up at this point, but I do feel this is a pretty favorable matchup for him. And The reason I say that is because with Meerschaert, he is primarily a grappler. His striking isn't terrible, but I honestly feel he is a bit slow on the feet and a little basic with his striking. And, he is someone who is obviously much more comfortable on the ground. But he is more of a submission guy. He's not a great wrestler. He's a guy who likes to pull guard occasionally, and he may even just play possum, kind of flop to the ground, and look to try and lure his opponent into his guard. But we more or less know the deal with Meerschaert. The guy generally just wants to get the fight to the ground, and either get the sub or just grind out the win. But the reason I say it's pretty favorable for Muradov is because he's fought better wrestlers than Meerschaert, and he's shown really good takedown defense. So if this fight stays standing, I think that he's got a very good chance of just piecing up Meerschaert and potentially just getting the knockout. So obviously I favor Muradov on the feet quite a bit, and I do think he's got good enough takedown defense to keep the fight standing. I think the only concern I have, the biggest concern I have for this fight is if he somehow engages in the grappling with Meerschaert, like maybe if he hurts him or he thinks that he hurts him, decides to engage in the guard and, gets his arm, snatched up or something. That definitely is a concern. But outside of that, I don't think that Meerschaert's got a really clear path to victory here. Furthermore, I think the durability of Meerschaert might be going. And, prior to his fight against Heinisch, he's only been knocked out once, and that was against Thiago Santos. And I remember up until then, it's one of those fights where everyone just kind of writes off because it is Thiago Santos. Meerschaert has shown pretty good durability, but, after the Heinisch fight, he's been knocked out twice already, once to Heinisch and then once to Chimaev. And I think that at this stage in his career, that definitely is a possibility, like his chin going, and it definitely is a concern going into this fight. So I feel that the chin of Meerschaert might definitely be cracked now. And against someone like Muradov, who can definitely, he's definitely got some power, I do think that Muradov is going to be alive for the knockout. So yeah, not too much more to say here. I think Muradov wins pretty dominantly, and outside of him just having a complete mental lapse, I think he should win this by knockout. Probably in the first round. Wouldn't be surprised if it happened in the second or third round, but I am leaning towards Muradov round 1 knockout here. And betting wise, I initially did have Muradov parlayed up with Mario Batista, but Batista, I think he got injured. He's no longer on the card. So basically, I'm just playing Muradov straight at 5 units, which, as far as value goes, not tremendously great value or anything, because at minus 450, the implied odds are at around 81, 82%. So to really have an edge on this fight, you'd have to assume that he wins at 86, 87% clip, which, I think it can happen, man. I think that Muradov should be minus 800 or something, honestly. I just think that outside of just him getting caught in a freak submission or something, he should win a pretty clear, pretty dominant victory here. So yeah, I got Muradov, and I have Muradov by round 1 knockout. All right, in this matchup, we have Andre Petroski versus Michael Gilmore, and I'm not really sure how this fight got made. Both of these guys lost their tough fights, but I guess they really need some bodies for this card, so I guess they're getting a contract. But in any case, this is a pretty low-level fight, in my opinion. I don't think either guys are that good. And, before I go any further, I do have to mention there are no lines available for this fight just yet. So I'll try and line the fight the best I can after I do the breakdowns here. So I guess we'll start with Petroski here first. He does appear to primarily be a wrestler. The guy will generally look to blitz in when he's striking to close the distance, look to get in on his opponent's hip. Does seem to have a pretty explosive double. And, if he isn't able to get the takedown, I've seen him just hold opponents up against the fence. When he is able to get his opponents to the ground, I don't think that his top control is particularly good. I don't even think he's that active on top either. It does look like he has a lot of finishes on the regional scene, but, you look at these guys, 1, 2, and 1, 2 and 2, 1 and 1, 7 and 11, 4 and 1. So, very, very low level guys. And the one guy that, he did fight with a little bit of experience in there, Aaron Jeffrey, at, with 8-2 record, looks like, he wasn't able to do much there. Jeffrey was able to, fend off a lot of the takedowns and basically get back to his feet relatively easily after getting taken down. And Petroski, in my opinion, definitely seems like a bit of a front runner where if he's not having a lot of success with his wrestling and grappling, he will maybe slow down and possibly just start to wilt a bit in there, because in his fight with Aaron Jeffrey, he was pretty aggressive with his wrestling, but never really had much success with it. He started to slow down, and Jeffrey was able to fight his way back into it. I believe he landed a knee near the end of the second round. But yeah, it definitely seems like if Petroski isn't having his way with the wrestling, he'll definitely slow down. And I think that happened again against Bryan Battle, where he was pretty aggressive that first round, but that second round when he wasn't able to get the finish, Battle was able to come back there and get the submission there. Fortunately for him in this matchup, I don't think he'll be facing that big of a threat in Michael Gilmore, who, quite frankly, I don't think is UFC caliber. I don't even think he's tough caliber, but I think they needed a fighter short notice, so he was able to step in. Anyways, seems like he's a striker, does seem to have some kicks, but maybe that's about it, because from what I've seen, I haven't really seen too much from him, aside from the fact that he's got like a decent kicking game, seems to have some pretty heavy leg kicks, but outside of that, just does not look good whatsoever. Honestly, this fight is kind of a joke. I really don't know why they made this fight. I honestly don't know what Battle really does well, or not Battle, Gilmore does well. So, if anyone's done like extensive tape on this guy, let me know what's going on with him. But for me, I just really have no idea what he does well. But I can tell you what he doesn't do well, and that's jiu-jitsu, because all three of his losses were by submission, and they did not look good whatsoever. So for one of them, his fight against Randy Patino, he had actually hurt and blocked Patino in that fight. Patino's on his back, and Gilmore decides to engage in his guard, maybe just look for the finish there, but ends up getting subbed by triangle choke. So the guy just doesn't seem to have great jiu-jitsu awareness there. And then in his fight against Gilbert Urbina, I think he pretty much just gets his back taken like early in that fight. Wasn't really able to do much, and then eventually just gets subbed late in that first round. So yeah, I guess Gilmore's just got a knack for getting subbed. But taking a look at this matchup, I really don't know if Petroski's going to be able to threaten that. Petroski's only got one sub on his record, and that was or two subs actually, one by Kimura and then one, it just says submission, doesn't really say how he got it. But, from what I've seen, Petroski doesn't seem like a big submission guy. He's just mainly a wrestler, but if he is able to get his wrestling going, and if he does spend enough top time, on Gilmore, he could very well find the submission. So I don't think that's off the table here. But, ultimately, I am going to side with Petroski here. I think he's got, an actual skill set. I think that he could very well just pursue the wrestling and maybe have a lot of success there. Maybe Gilmore's got a bit of an advantage on the feet just because Petroski does seem a bit stiff there. But I do see Petroski going in on the double. I see Petroski just shooting the takedown early. I don't see why he'd want to stand with Gilmore. So, I got Petroski here. I think he either wins a pretty dominant decision or, actually, I wouldn't be surprised if Gilmore got the ground and pound finish or was able to find the sub, just because I feel that. Wait, did I say Gilmore? I meant to say Petroski. I wouldn't be surprised if Petroski found the submission or the ground and pound finish, just because Gilmore seems pretty bad on the ground. So the pick here for me is going to be Petroski. I'd say it should be like a minus 200 favorite, honestly. Not that I'd bet it or anything at this number, but I do feel that Petroski should be a moderate favorite here. Just because I think there's a pretty clear path to victory with the grappling for him. That said, though, the guy's cardio definitely is extremely suspect. And if he isn't able to get Gilmore out of there, I can see Gilmore putting it on maybe later in the second round, maybe in the third round. But generally, I do favor Petroski to be able to get the finish. So the pick here is Petroski, and give me Petroski to win by first round submission. And moving along, we have Kevin Lee versus Daniel Rodriguez. And Lee is the minus 150 favorite. Comeback on Rodriguez is plus 130. And this is a great fight, honestly. Rodriguez is coming in short notice. Lee was originally scheduled to go up against Sean Brady, who's a legit prospect. A lot of respect for Kevin Lee for actually taking that fight. But, obviously, Brady pulls out due to an injury or something, and then Rodriguez is taking this fight short notice. And, this is another, kind of risky fight for him, honestly. Like, Rodriguez isn't exactly a name in the division, and, I don't think he's even ranked. But the guy's got good hands. He's got good boxing and stuff. So, this is it almost feels like a high risk, low reward sort of fight. Not much to gain here, but just a lot of respect for Kevin Lee for taking this fight anyways. So, Kevin Lee is primarily a wrestler. The guy's got a great jab on the feet and will mix in some kicks, but overall, I just don't think his striking is great. I think it is a little bit rudimentary. It's not bad, but I don't think he'll be winning too many striking battles unless it's Gregor Gillespie. But the guy is primarily a wrestler. He likes to go for the single. He's got great timing on the double, and once he's on top, he's extremely aggressive there. Maybe too aggressive because he does expend a lot of energy hunting the sub, and sometimes actually can give up position. When he's looking for that submission. And his cardio is a little bit questionable as he will slow down and, does get a little sloppy later in the fight. And that's definitely led to him, dropping some of the fights there as well. But, I don't think that his cardio is actually terrible or anything. He just fights at just such a high pace and intensity that, he's not really able to keep up. I think that if he slows it down a bit and focuses a bit more on just positional grappling, I think he'd have a lot of success, right? I think if the guy's, if he's not so aggressive with the ground and pound or the submissions, he can definitely bank a number of rounds without tiring himself out. So while I do think that his cardio maybe isn't the best, I do feel that with proper pacing, he could look a lot better with, when he's grappling. As for his opponent, Rodriguez, so he is primarily a striker. He's got very slick boxing. He's got a great jab, very quick hands, will throw volume, and does generally have a pretty high work rate. And, it does look like he's got pretty decent power compared to it, relative to his work rate, right? For someone who throws as much as he does, you wouldn't expect him to have as much pop on his shots as he does. But, the guy definitely can crack, and, he'll be throwing a lot of strikes too. And, he's had a pretty solid UFC run so far. But, if I'm being honest, he has been given a number of, pretty softball matchups post Tim Means. Still a really solid run though, but, the guy's fought primarily strikers. I mean, you look at the guys he's fought after Tim Means, Gabe Green, a very low-level guy, Dwight Grant, who I don't think is that good, Nicholas Dalby, decent fighters, Mike Perry, who, 2021, Mike Perry, not really that good, Preston Parsons, guy coming in short notice, making his UFC debut, so, he's not exactly fighting bums or anything, but he's not fighting, the best guys or anything. I'd say probably like low level guys that he's primarily getting matched up with. So I guess my point is, while he has looked pretty good, it's against, I'd say, lower level guys, whereas, Kevin Lee's fought the much higher level of competition, without a doubt. But yeah, going back to Rodriguez here, he's fought primarily strikers. These guys aren't guys that'll look to get the fight to the ground. Although, he has shown some solid takedown defense against some of these fighters who have, attempted to wrestle. He will attack the guillotine. I haven't seen too much footage of him in regards to the defensive grappling, but from what I have seen, and this is primarily from that Mike Perry fight, it's that he actually doesn't look that good off his back. And yeah, I think it was in that first round where Perry took him down. He had a good amount of success just on top of him, and Rodriguez, he just didn't look good. I don't think he had any urgency to get up. Looked pretty bad off his back, honestly. But on the feet, he does have pretty slick striking, and his takedown defense does look decent. It's just that if you are able to get him on his back, he might not be that great there. And as far as this matchup goes, I do definitely favor Lee here. I think that the wrestling and the grappling of Lee really should win him the fight, and obviously Kevin Lee's got the experience and the level of competition edge by a pretty wide margin. Granted, he has fought mainly at 155. And, some of the guys he's fought against, he definitely did have the size advantage over. And, there's definitely going to be a narrative going around that Kevin Lee's going to be, undersized for the division here. And, I don't think if that's necessarily true. I think that Lee definitely is going to be a bit shorter than average, but, Kevin Lee he's jacked, and, he's got freakishly long arms. So I don't think he's going to be completely undersized into the division. He will be a little bit undersized, but I don't think it'll be that noticeable, and I don't think it'll play that big of a factor here in this fight, especially since he's a wrestler. So on paper, while Kevin Lee looks like he might be giving up a bit of size, I think he'll size up pretty well here with Rodriguez. I feel that him being the shorter, stockier fighter might actually be beneficial for him in this matchup, especially if he's going to look to go for the wrestling. I don't think it'd be a really good idea for him to look and stand in box with Rodriguez, who, definitely will have the size and reach advantage over him. And Rodriguez definitely will be the better, more fluid striker here. So I see Lee just going to the wrestling here, and I honestly see him pretty much dominating in the grappling. I'm not saying D-Rod won't win this fight, because I do feel there is a path to victory for him. If he is able to keep the fight standing, he'll have a good amount of success. And maybe if Lee is getting tired or sloppy in there, Rodriguez might be able to catch him in a guillotine. But, I don't really see that happening too often. I think more often than not, Lee is going to be able to get the takedowns. He might even be able to get D-Rod out of there, maybe get the submission. But, I honestly see Lee having a lot of success with the wrestling, with the grappling. So, yeah, the pick here is going to be Kevin Lee, and I do actually have a 2-unit bet placed on him at minus 150. I think that I just think there's going to be a massive grappling advantage for Lee, and as long as he doesn't completely gas himself out, I see him winning a pretty dominant decision, but I wouldn't be surprised if Lee was able to get the submission or even the TKO stoppage on the ground. And one more thing I completely forgot to mention before, right? There's going to be the narrative that Lee's just going to gas out in there and, he's going to get finished in the third round, which, it can happen, but you look at the guys who's historically been able to do that against him. So Tony Ferguson, who, that's all this guy does, right? That's what he's known for doing. So Tony Ferguson, Rafael Dos Anjos, RDA, finishes him in the fourth round. RDA, perennial, top 15, top 10 guy. The guy is a legend and a very high-level grappler himself. And then Charles Oliveira in a fight where, I'd say he was winning the first 2 rounds, but, he ends up getting submitted in that last round against Oliveira, who, again, is a very high-level grappler and is currently the lightweight champ. So, these are guys who are, very high-level grapplers, guys who are just very high level in general that are making him work, making him tired, and eventually finding the submission against him. I don't think that Rodriguez has got close to the level of grappling as these guys. I don't think that Rodriguez will be able to push Lee and make him work as hard as he did as some of the other guys he's faced. So yeah, I think Lee wins this. I think he wins a really dominant decision or potentially gets the finish. Okay, so we have another tough matchup here. Ricky Turcios versus Brady Hiestand. And this is another fight that doesn't have a line just yet, so I'll be lining it a little later. I'm going to break down each fighter first. So let's start with Ricky Turcios here. So the guy appears to primarily be a striker. He's someone who definitely will throw volume. He does a really good job of mixing it up. He's got a really good kicking game. Just generally a very high-paced striker, can definitely get a little wild with the striking. And, as far as his grappling tendencies go, he does seem to be kind of comfortable, off his back, either throwing up subs or strikes, which, not the best optically, but, he does stay pretty active off his back. His cardio definitely seems to check out as well. He won his fight against Argueta basically just on the basis of being just the guy who's fresher in the third round. I mean, he was just basically able to take the back of Argueta for most of that third round and just control him there. And the first 2 rounds of that fight was actually just crazy high-paced back and forth. And, both guys were tired, but it looked like Turcios was able to fight through it much better than Argueta. And it definitely seemed like Argueta had expended most of his cardio in those first 2 rounds. So overall, while I don't think that Tercios is the most technical fighter, he more than makes up for it with his cardio, and you can kind of get away with that at the lower weight division where, a lot of guys don't have like crazy power or anything, so you can kind of just be just an output machine and just win a decision, just outwork your opponents. His opponent, Brady Hiestand, appears to primarily be a grappler, and he does seem to be a pretty one-dimensional grappler actually. And I'm not sure if he could really match the pace and cardio of Tercios, but it does look like he can definitely attack the grappling for 3 pretty hard rounds, although he was getting tagged up pretty bad against Reddinghouse anytime the fight was on the feet. Anyways, with Hiestand, it looks like he generally wants to get the fight, along the fence. He'll look to hold his opponents there, look to get a bit of control there, and maybe get the fight to the ground. He'll generally just kind of smother his opponents. I don't think he's the most active or anything. He'll just look to put his weight on opponents, honestly, and really just look to control them. On the feet, he definitely seems a bit hittable, and especially so since he'll start to slow down since he's expending so much energy in the grappling. And that kind of happened in his fight against Reddinghouse, which I'm not really sure how he won that fight, because I'd say the outside of that first round, which he won, I'd say pretty decisively with his grappling, rounds 2 or 3, he pretty much just resorted to Wallenstall and, was getting touched up by Reddinghouse. But, he did have a decent amount of control time, but I don't think he did any damage whatsoever. With that said, though, that still was a somewhat impressive performance, because Hiestand up until that point had really beaten nobody. I mean, I think the combined record of the opponents he's beaten was like 1 in 24 or something. And, he was going up against Josh Reddinghouse, who, is like a regional vet at this point. And, even though I don't really agree with the decision, he was able to accumulate a bit of control time and just kind of survive in there. So, still kind of impressive considering he hadn't really fought anyone of note. Then, in his next fight in TUF, he gets matched up with Vince Murdoch. He runs through him pretty quickly. I believe Murdoch fucked up his knee in that fight. But, even if Murdoch didn't fuck up his knee that fight, he probably would have lost. Murdoch's just not a good fighter. And, I don't think that's really a fight you could really take too much from anyways. But taking a look at this matchup, I do think that I got to favor the striking of Tercios a bit more. Definitely favor the cardio of Tercios. As far as the wrestling and grappling goes, maybe I'll give it to Hiestand just because of how aggressively he attacks it. But honestly, outside of just wet blanketing his opponents, Hiestand just is not a great grappler. And quite frankly, I'm not really a fan of his style. It's just kind of boring, if I'm being honest. And, taking a look at this fight, it's kind of tough to call because I do favor Tercios pretty much everywhere. The only reservation I have about this fight is that Hiestand might just be able to get a ton of control time, just work the Wallenstall. And if he is somehow able to get this fight to the ground, Tercios has shown a penchant for just staying on his back, just throwing up elbows, throwing up submissions. And if he isn't able to land a submission, he could very well just throw a round away, just fighting off his back. But ultimately, I do have to side with Tercios here. I think that he's the better fighter. I think he's the more well-rounded fighter. I think that he's just got more tools to win here. Whereas with Hiestand, he's basically just got his grappling to go to. And, outside of that, if he's not having success there, he's likely going to get tuned up on the feet. And I haven't really seen his defensive grappling tested. And, for all we know, maybe Tercios will be able to pull off that submission from guard or something. But, just generally everywhere else, I do favor Tercios. So the pick here obviously is going to be Tercios for me. As far as how I'd line the fight, probably Tercios like minus 150 or something, maybe minus 150, minus 170, somewhere in that range. I don't think you can make him too big of a favorite because even though he's got a little more experience, Hiestand's just got such a grindy sort of style that can definitely steal rounds. Like, I gotta go back to his fight with Reddinghouse where, he won that first round, I think, but the second and third round, he was getting a bit of control time, but Reddinghouse was pretty much tuning up Hiestand anytime he was on the feet, and Hiestand's face was all busted up during that fight. And I could very well see this happening again in this fight where we see Turcios just landing at will on Hiestand. Hiestand's all busted up, but maybe he ends the round with a takedown or something, or he's able to wall install for maybe a couple minutes, or maybe even take Turcios down. And even though Turcios might be landing some nasty elbows from guard or something, he still could potentially win the round because some judges will fucking score the control time for him. So I don't think that Hiestand should be that big of a dog, but I do think that Turcios should be favored here. So the pick here is going to be Turcios, and I doubt I'll be betting this fight unless I can get a good number on Turcios or a really juicy number, a juicy plus number on Hiestand. All right, in this matchup, we have Bryan Battle versus Gilbert Urbina, and this is one of those tough fights that just got announced recently, and there aren't any lines for this fight, so we'll go ahead and line this fight in a bit. But first, let's go over these fighters first. So Bryan Battle, the guy is primarily a striker from what it seems. He's got a good kicking game, which I feel like makes up about 80% of his offense. I don't really see him throwing too many strikes. A lot of his offense is just, the teep or the head kick or something. But one thing I do have to say is it does look like he throws a lot of naked leg kicks, which leaves him open for counters, and it doesn't look like he's really faced anyone that could really take advantage of that. But, I think as he starts fighting better opponents, they'll definitely be able to abuse that a bit. And, what I have seen from him, he does like to work in the clinch occasionally. He's got some pretty nasty knees there. Has generally shown decent takedown defense, but not a lot of footage on the guy. So it's really hard to say conclusively. His opponent, Urbina, appears to be a grappler. So this is going to be a pretty interesting matchup. We do have a striker versus grappler matchup here. But, Urbina, although he definitely seems a bit more proficient on the ground, it does look like there are times where he's content to stand and strike with opponents, even if it's not really working in his favor. Most notably, I'd say in his fight against Gore, where he was repeatedly getting dropped. Gore was, just touching him up. Was basically just landing at will at him. And Urbina didn't really show any urgency to get the fight to the ground. I don't know if it's maybe because he's maybe too slow, or if Gore was able to just time him anytime he, closed the distance, he was able to just catch him. So I don't know if it's that, or if, Urbina just has terrible fight IQ. But in any case, the guy, I don't think really attempted to take down that fight and ended up getting knocked out in the second round there. But, I think the writing was on the wall in that fight, since the first minute, because Gore was pretty much just able to land on Urbina every time he threw a strike, essentially. But in a number of his other fights, one on The Ultimate Fighter and then another on the regional scene, he was able to take his opponents back pretty quickly and then pretty much just dominate them there, eventually find the sub. But, I don't know if you could really take too much from that. These guys are pretty low level, and with how quickly they gave up their back, I'm just not sure if, these guys are just terrible or if Urbina's just a really good, grappler or something. But I'm going to say it's probably somewhere in the middle. But, in any case, I do think that Urbina is much more comfortable when the fight is on the ground. And taking a look at this matchup, it's going to be a little difficult to really get a good read on it because we do have an interesting clash of styles there, and both guys are pretty low level in my opinion. So it's hard to really cap this fight correctly, but I think this is close to pick 'em just because I think on the feet, I definitely do give the advantage to Battle, although I wouldn't give him like a massive edge or anything because the guy's striking I don't think is like elite or anything. He just uses his kicks really well, but outside of that, I really don't think his striking is all that. And on the feet, Urbina is a bit hittable, but again, I just don't know if Battle is at that level to really take advantage of that. And quite frankly, I think that Battle is a little hittable himself, so I do think that Urbina will probably have a bit of success with the striking, although his striking just does not look good. However, if the fight does somehow get to the ground, I do favor Urbina there quite a bit more, especially if he's somehow able to take the back of Battle. I think it's going to be a really quick night for him if that happens. But, outside of that, I don't know if there's too much more to say about this fight. I think it's relatively straightforward. Two pretty low-level guys who are, specialize in two different things. So, if I had to make a pick here, I'm going to side with Urbina just because I think he's got the grappling upside. I think that while on the feet, I think that Battle's maybe the better striker. I don't think he'll necessarily run away with it. Whereas with Urbina, I feel that if he is somehow able to get the fight to the ground, it could look like a very lopsided fight. So for that reason, I will side with Urbina. As far as lining the fight goes, I'd put it at maybe near a pick'em, maybe slight lean towards Urbina, but I don't really think I'll be betting this fight unless the line is just really egregious or something. But ultimately, I am going to side with Urbina here. Not a super high confident pick, and I doubt I'll be betting this fight unless I can get like plus 170 or 180 or something. But I doubt it. And in the main event, we have Edson Barboza versus Giga Chikadze. And this is a great matchup, a very exciting matchup, one that I honestly didn't see coming, but I'm really looking forward to. But let's start with Barboza here. So, honestly, just a shout out to him for even taking this matchup. The guy's on a 2-fight win streak, coming off of a knockout win over Shane Burgos, who I believe is like a top 10, maybe top 15 guy. And now he's, I think, fighting down. Although I think that Chikadze's similarly ranked too. But in any case, just a shout out to him. I mean, the guy's always game to fight, and he always puts on a great showing. But, taking a look at Barboza, what he does well. So the guy is primarily a striker. He's got great leg kicks, very explosive striking, pretty quick hands in my opinion, pretty good timing also. And, he will throw volume and we'll mix it up quite a bit. I mean, he'll throw in like some of the spinning kicks just for good measure there. And, he is a little bit hittable, and does seem to struggle a bit against, just high pressure fighters. But outside of that, I don't think he has, too many glaring weaknesses. Just overall, I think a very solid striker, very solid fighter, and kind of underrated in my opinion. He's got a number of losses on his record, but, they're against some of the best guys, and arguably was at, a weight class, up a weight class, because I think he's fitting in really well at this featherweight division. The only thing that I do want to mention is I feel he might be at the tail end of his prime, if not already a bit past it. I do feel he is on a slight decline, but, I do think he's still got it in him. And, he's still fighting some of the best guys in there, and he's given a really good account of himself, honestly. Like, let's take a look at his recent record real quick. So, he has that win over Dan Hooker, a really solid win there against a top 10 guy at lightweight, and then loses Justin Gaethje. Not a bad loss whatsoever. Gaethje is a contender right now in the feather or the lightweight division, and then loses to Paul Felder, which that was a fight he arguably should have won. It was a very close fight. Loses to Dan Ige, and this was his featherweight debut, but that was a fight he arguably should have won as well. And then puts together a 2-fight win streak against Makwan Amirkhani, who honestly not that great, but still a name in the division. And Shane Burgos, who he was actually able to finish pretty impressively. And Shane Burgos, top 15 guy, and historically has been able to take a lot of damage, with his only other finish loss being against Calvin Kattar. So Barboza definitely looking pretty good at featherweight, and it does seem like some of the power is translating to the division. But taking a look at his opponent, Giga Chikadze, so the guy is a striker as well, a little bit unproven still, so we don't quite know where his ceiling is at just yet, but he definitely looks like he's got the goods. The guy can fight out of both stances, although from what I've seen, it looks like when he's in orthodox or when he's in southpaw, he's definitely going to be looking for that body kick. But outside of that, I don't see him throwing too much offense out of the the southpaw stance. Although he will switch it up. He's got very nasty kicks, loves to go to the body, and then he really does load up big on those kicks as well. I do feel that he might be a better kicker than he is a boxer, but I don't think he's got bad boxing or anything. He's just someone I feel who's just much more comfortable and much more fluid with his kicking than he is with some of his striking. The big thing about Chikadze, though, is I do think he's got pretty suspect takedown defense and pretty suspect cardio as well. And, we haven't really seen that tested in any of his recent fights, but, that was something that was a concern, when he had first joined the UFC. And, I'm not 100% sure if that's something he's really shored up, because we haven't really seen him tested against a grappler. But, that is definitely something that is concerning. So, yeah, it does appear that, he slows down in high grappling paced fights. And with how much he loads up on his shots, I think he would slow down too if it was a very high pace, like striking match as well. Obviously, not as much as if his opponents were grappling with him, but, the guy does load up pretty big on his shots. And, I don't think it'll be too big of a concern for him in this matchup, as Barboza is primarily a striker, although, he has shot before, but generally Barboza will look to keep it standing. But, taking a look at this matchup, I do definitely favor the experience and the level of competition of, Barboza significantly. Like, I mentioned briefly the guys that Barboza's fought. He's fought the likes of, Shane Burgos, Amir Khani, Dan Ige, Paul Felder, Justin Gaethje, Dan Hooker, Kevin Lee, Khabib Nurmagomedov, Beneil Dariush. So, man, the list goes on and on. The guys fought the who's who of the division for such a long time, whereas Chikadze's really not fought anyone of note. I mean, he does have a nice win over Cub Swanson, who, the guy's a bit of a veteran at this point, and, we didn't really get to see that fight play out, but, prior to that, who's he really beaten, though? Probably his best win you could say is maybe Omar Morales, but I honestly don't think Morales is that good. Yeah, and up until that point, I mean, he's also got a win over Erwin Rivera, who's fucking in jail right now for stabbing his sister or some shit, and, Jamal Emmers, who I think is a pretty solid opponent, but, man, outside of that, I don't think he's really fought anyone of note. Whereas with Barboza, I mean, the guy's really just fought some of the best guys at 155 and at 145 as well. That aside, though, it is a very interesting stylistic matchup. Both guys are very good kickers, in my opinion. Barboza's great at targeting the legs. Chikadze really good at going to the body. And, something to note here is when Chikadze switches stances, he'll be open for the body kick from Barboza as well. And, Barboza, I feel, is definitely going to see some of that coming and probably look to take advantage a little bit as well. And, something to note is this is a 5-rounder as well, which definitely spices things up a bit because, Barboza, I believe, has only gone past the 3rd round once, and I believe that was against Kevin Lee, where he got dominated, right? So, that was against Kevin Lee, and I did get dominated that fight. And Chikadze, he's never been outside of the 3rd round, at least in the UFC, right? So it's hard to say who it really favors, but I think it might slightly favor Chikadze or Barboza a little bit. Sorry, I keep fucking up the names here. But I think with how much Chikadze slows down, I think that a 5-round fight might favor Barboza a little bit, although I think Barboza does slow down a bit as well. So, I think it might be a bit of a wash here. So just forget what I said there. But anyways, taking a look back at this matchup, I do think that I am going to slightly lean towards Barboza, just because I feel he might be the better striker, and he's definitely fought the higher level of competition. He's been in there with some of the best guys, and Barboza doesn't really grapple, but I do feel that he's got a little bit of it in his back pocket here. I mean, I think he did shoot a takedown against what's his name, Felder, and once in a while he will pull it out, and I'm not expecting him to in this matchup, but if he does, it will only benefit him, I think, especially with how much we've seen Chikadze struggle with some of the grappling. And I think it'd just be a really good idea for Barboza to go to it a little bit to really make Chikadze kind of work and, expend some of his cardio. So, I got to side with Barboza here. I think that, just on paper, the guy's got, a ton of advantages. I honestly think that Barboza is probably the quicker guy in there, even though he's a little older. I just think that Barboza in general is just probably the better athlete. And once again, he's just been in there with some of the best guys, whereas Chikadze's still been, still relatively unproven and honestly hasn't really gone through much adversity. Whereas with Barboza, he's, been in there. He's been beat up pretty bad in there, but, he has fought through it. He's a tough guy, man. Chikadze hasn't, I'd say outside of maybe being pushed a little harder by Emmers, hasn't really faced like really stiff competition. My only reservation for Barboza is that, he is a bit older and, he's only, I think, 3 years older than Chikadze, but at 35, with the amount of fight miles that he has on him, that definitely is working against him. That said, though, Barboza hasn't looked that bad, honestly. I mean, he still looked really good against Burgos, looked really good against Amirkhani, Dan Ige, Paul Felder. So yeah, unless Chikadze just overwhelms him early, I see this being a very competitive fight. But ultimately, the pick here is going to be Barboza. I think he's going to be able to edge it out. And I do have a 1.25 unit bet placed on him at minus 110. I think as the fight goes on, he'll have a bit more success landing on Chikadze. And, I think that Chikadze will definitely slow down a bit as the fight goes on. I think Barboza should be able to win a pretty close decision, maybe a 48-47 or 49-46 decision, maybe even get a knockout later in the fight, depending on how much Chikadze slows down. But ultimately, I am going to side with Barboza here. I think he gets it done. Let's go with round 4 knockout. And that'll do it for this episode. There you have it. Broke down the full card. Really appreciate anyone who's made it this far already. Not much left here, just got to do some plugs. So again, if anyone's found any of this information useful or helpful or interesting, give me a like, give me a subscribe to the channel. It really helps out. And it definitely looks like the channel's been picking up a bit these past couple of weeks. So shout out to everyone who's really been chipping in and making it possible. And also give me a follow on Twitter. Been trying to get that going as well. But outside of that, I think that should do it. So I guess best of luck, everyone, to your bets. And I guess I'll catch you guys next week.